Chinese history has been dominated by male figures, but every now and again a female pops up that has a huge impact on Chinese history, whether they're real or made up. Today's episode will be a story about a fictional female figure and has been widely spoken of being the most evil Chinese woman in history. G'day everyone, welcome to the Bamboo History Podcast, a podcast that focuses on Chinese and East Asian history. I'm your host Stephen, and yeah, let's just get straight into it. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the legend of Daji, a woman/fox spirit who is widely known as the most evil woman in ancient Chinese history. Wow, most evil. That is a stretch. Well, okay, let me start telling you the story and you be the judge then of whether she was the most evil woman in Chinese history. Daji, spelt D-A-J-I, is an example of where a real-life person has been exaggerated in history through stories, myths, and legends. In order to understand who Daji was, we need to paint the world she lived in at the time. So, Daji lived during the Shang dynasty. For those of you who don't know, the Shang dynasty, Shang spelt S-H-A-N-G, was the second recorded dynasty in Chinese history, but it's actually the first dynasty where there is physical archaeological evidence that proves the existence of this dynasty. The dynasty before the Shang, the Xia, is still semi-mythological because no one's really found anything that proves their existence. The Shang dynasty lasted between the years 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE, and our focus of today's story is set during the reign of the last king of the Shang dynasty. The name of this king is King Zhou, Zhou spelt Z-H-O-U. Now, King Zhou is a very famous figure because he's widely known as a really cruel and despotic ruler. Daji was actually one of the wives of King Zhou. And King Zhou was recorded as being really evil, just a really bad king. Now, I'll give you some examples. He was bad because he would spend all day drinking, partying, hanging out with the ladies, rather than attending to government affairs. He was really cruel to his people as well. He'd increase taxes to the point where the people didn't have any money left. And he would take money from them to build all these extravagant gardens and palaces, and this platform called Lu Tai, which was actually found by archaeologists recently. King Zhou's behaviour was exacerbated by his wife Daji, who was really evil as well and just as messed up as he was. And the messed up thing was, they both had something in common. Both of them had a hobby, a common interest of watching other people suffer, get tortured, and die. So then now you might ask, why is Daji known as one of the most evil women in ancient China? Okay, let's start off with the first one, right? She had a pregnant woman cut open. Not because of a C-section, not to deliver the baby, because she just wanted to find out what was inside her belly. That is so ridiculous. Imagine if someone did that in real life. That's basically Jeffrey Dahmer level. That's basically a serial killer, necrophiliac, just messed up, okay? Another example. One day she was walking and she saw a farmer walking barefoot on ice. I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? I don't think. And you know what she did? She had the farmer's feet cut. Cut off, yeah. And you know why? Just so she can study his feet and try to figure out how he was resistant to ice by walking barefoot on it. That's sounds like a psychopath, right? And that wasn't all. To please Daji, King Zhou would do anything to please her because he loved her so much. For her beauty, for her sadistic tendencies, even if it meant doing the most unspeakable of things. The most famous one, which is mentioned in stories, is that Daji created a torture device along with the king. It was a bronze cylinder called a paoluo, P-A-O-L-U-O. You know what it was? It was a bronze cylinder covered in oil, And then at the bottom of the cylinder, it was heated by charcoal. And the cylinder was heated to the point that it was burning hot. Like the surface of the cylinder was really hot. Torture victims would be forced to walk on top of the cylinder. And if they slipped, they would die. They would fall into the burning charcoal and die. And to make matters worse for them, the cylinder was covered in oil, it was slippery, and can you imagine if you were one of the victims, you would be walking on top going, ugh, so slippery, oh, shit. And amongst that, whilst you were doing your little slippery dance on top of the cylinder, trying not to die and burn to death, Daji and King Zhou would be laughing at you from the background like, look at this guy, look at him dancing around, that's so funny, oh, he's gonna die, but it's so funny. Yeah, so messed up, so bloody messed up. And there was a saying as well that another way of torturing people on this bronze cylinder was that the people were actually tied onto the cylinder and they would be slowly roasted to death. This is just, I don't know what to say. I don't know. And victims could be anyone. Prisoners, civilians, even their own family members. The most famous example is King Zhou's uncle, Bi Gan. Bi Gan, spelt B-I-G-A-N. Now, unlike his nephew, Bi Gan was actually a nice guy. He was a righteous person. And whenever King Zhou did something evil or cruel, he'd always speak out against his nephew, saying, "Mate, that's the wrong thing to do. You can't do that." And obviously his nephew was the king and didn't like being spoken to that way. And in the end, he flipped. So there's different sayings on how Bi Gan was killed. The first one was his nephew, the king, killed him himself. Because one day, Bi Gan was disapproving of his nephew's wasteful spending. And King Zhou had enough. So he said, "You know what, uncle? Everyone says you're a sage. Everyone says you're a saint. And they say that a sage and a saint has a heart of 7 apertures. Apertures is like holes. I want to prove if you're a sage and a saint. So I'm going to cut you open and take out your heart." Oh. So yeah, Bi Gan had his heart taken out just so the king can prove a point. The second saying is that Daji killed him. Now, stories say that Daji was a fox spirit, and the fox spirits were evil. And Bi Gan, being the righteous man, killed off many of Daji's fellow fox spirits. And killing off the fox spirits made Daji really mad, so she wanted to take revenge against Bi Gan. In the novel Feng Sheng Yan Yi, or known in English as Investiture of the Gods, it is said that Daji, in order to take revenge on Bi Gan, feigns illness, so she pretends to be sick, like and she tells the king, "You have to save me, you have to save me." And King Zhou was like, "Oh, my love, how do I save you? How do I save you? I'll do anything to save you." And Daji replied, Well, king, my love, there is a way to save me. You know your uncle, Bi Gan? Well, he's a sage or a saint, right? It is said that a heart of a sage or a saint can cure my illness. I need you to take his heart out for me so he can save me. Please, please. And then that's what the king did. Because of Daji's words, he took his own uncle's heart out just to save her. And she wasn't even sick. She was just pretending so she could kill Bi Gan. As a side note though, Bi Gan actually has a happy ending. You know that god that's often in Asian supermarkets? You know, Cai Shen, the god of wealth? Well, that's actually the reincarnation of Bi Gan. So he became a god in the end, the god of wealth, presumably because he was always speaking out against the wasteful spending of his nephew. So yeah, good ending for this guy. Now, Daji was not a good woman. She would make King Zhou do the most extravagant of things for her, with no care at all to their people. A really famous thing that King Zhou did was create a lake of wine and a forest of meat, known in Chinese as 酒池肉林. So what was this 酒池肉林 lake of wine and forest of meat? He basically created a huge pool that he filled with wine, and then, in the forest next to that lake, he would hang meat all along the trees. And then people would just party there all day and all night, and Daji was really happy about that. They also both enjoyed watching people run naked around the forest playing cat and mouse. Oh yeah, and if he didn't want to play, like one of the concubines of King Zhou, like she didn't want to play, he had her executed. And he also had her father executed and then ground into meat and fed. Imagine if they made a Netflix show out of this. It would be so gory. You'd think that with all this evilness, all this cruelty and barbaric ways, someone would speak out, right? Someone would finally do something about it. Well, yeah, someone did. A neighboring tribe called Zhou, spelled Z-H-O-U, don't confuse it with King Zhou, which is spelt the same in English but pronounced in a different tone in Chinese. The neighboring tribe of Zhou was sick and tired of the king's acts and decided to rise up. In the year 1046 BCE, led by Jifa, spelt J-I-F-A, the Zhou defeated the Shang at the Battle of Muye, spelt M-U-Y-E, and that brought the downfall of the Shang dynasty and King Zhou. Daji obviously couldn't escape too. When the Zhou soldiers found her, they had her executed, although some say she committed suicide first. And when they executed her, they cut off her head and hung it onto a pole to show everyone. That's what you get for being such an evil person. So yeah, that was essentially Daji in a nutshell. But please don't jump to any conclusions on Daji and King Zhou just yet. Remember, Daji and King Zhou have been exaggerated through history and fictional retellings. As I've mentioned before in my previous episodes, the biggest mistake of reading history is to take everything at face value and just jump to conclusions like, oh, the book says Daji is evil, she is evil. Not necessarily. Let's take a look at Daji first. What were her origins, you might be wondering right now? Historical records show that Daji was the daughter of a nobleman of a tribe called Su, spelt S-U. So her full name was actually Su Daji, with her surname being Su. The Su tribe came under attack by King Zhou and the Shang dynasty, and they were a lot stronger than the Su. So the leader of the tribe, that nobleman, thought, you know what, we'll just submit to King Zhou and the Shang dynasty. We won't fight them, we'll cooperate with them. And to pledge their loyalty to the Shang dynasty, he offered up his daughter, Daji, to the king. And legends have it that whilst Daji was really evil, she was actually really beautiful as well. And when King Zhou saw her for the first time, he was like drooling, like, she's so hot. Oh my goodness, she's so beautiful. Wow. And then was so happy, took her in as his wife. In the stories, however, such as Feng Sheng Yan Yi, Daji isn't a human, but possessed by a silver fox spirit. This silver fox spirit was actually sent to Earth by Nuwa, the goddess that created the Earth. If you don't remember who Nuwa is, I did an episode about her in episode 10 of my podcast. So anyway, King Zhou had offended Nuwa in the past, and she wanted to get revenge on him, so she sent Daji, the fox, down to Earth to punish him. It was said that whilst the human princess of Su was on her way to the capital of the Shang dynasty with her new husband, King Zhou, the fox crept up, killed her, and then possessed her body, so Daji was no longer human, but actually a fox inside. Nuwa had said to the fox, if you manage to punish King Zhou, I will grant you immortality. But clearly she had gone too far, and when Nuwa saw all the atrocities being committed, she was visibly upset, and when Daji came back to her after King Zhou died, instead of getting immortality, she was actually executed by Nuwa. So that's a lesson for you all. Don't go too far on anything that you do in life. Now let's talk about King Zhou. King Zhou is known as a really cruel and despotic ruler because he's been vilified by historians in the future after him. But who was he actually? You see, let's start off with his name, King Zhou. Zhou is actually not his real name. Zhou is actually a derogatory term used for the king, and it means a horse crupper, which is a type of strap used on a horse. So the name itself is a dig towards the king. His real name is actually Dixin, spelled D-I-X-I-N. And unlike what was being portrayed, he actually did make some good contributions to the Shang. For instance, he expanded the territory of the Shang dynasty by attacking and taking over the Dongyi barbarian tribes to the southeast. By doing so, he created transport links between central and southeast China, and that promoted greater cultural exchange. The reason why I think, and why a lot of other people think, he's been vilified so much is because the Zhou, the people that defeated the Shang, needed legitimacy, as in, they needed to prove to the people why they were the rightful rulers of China. And to do so, the best way they could find was to smear dirt onto the previous king that they had overthrown, which was King Zhou. It's kind of like politics these days, to be honest. Like, you would obviously talk so much smack to the opposition, right? You'd say, oh, they're so bad at this, they're so bad at that. That's why I'm the rightful person to lead the country. It was the same back then. The first king of the Zhou dynasty, Jifa, would have said to everyone, King Zhou was absolute horse poo. He was such a bad king. That's why I overthrew him. That's why I'm your rightful king. Because if he said that King Zhou was a good king, all the civilians would have been like, then why did you overthrow him? You're not the rightful ruler. So hence, that's why many modern scholars believe that King Zhou's cruelty is often exaggerated, and that, whilst he might not have been the best king in the world, he probably wasn't as bad as he was portrayed to be. Before I go, however, I wanted to mention a little side story, and perhaps the reason why Daji was executed by the Zhou soldiers. So the leader of the Zhou, Jifa, had a brother. His name was Bo Yikao, spelled B-O-Y-I-K-A-O. And bear in mind, this is from the story Feng Sheng Yan Yi. Bo Yikao went to the capital of the Shang dynasty to negotiate a release of one of his family members. But whilst he's there, he meets Daji, and when Daji meets Bo Yikao, she falls in love with him and tries to seduce him because, she's an evil femme fatale woman, blah blah blah. But Bo Yikao was like, nah, not into you, man, and pushes her away. This makes Daji mad, so she tries to frame him. She goes to the king, King Zhou, and says, the king's like, oh sweetie, what's wrong? And then Daji's like, you see that man, Bo Yikao, he tried to molest me. Oh, I'm so scared. He tried to touch me. And the king was mad. He's like, oh, what? No one does that to my wife. And then executes Bo Yikao, has his corpse ground into meat, and then fed to his own father. Imagine being a dad and having been forced to eat your son's flesh. Oh, jeez. Horrible. And it's no surprise then that when the Zhou soldiers met Daji, they had her executed and her head cut off because they hated her guts. And look, honestly, after this episode, I'm sure many of you would probably hate her guts as well because of the evil things that she did. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the story of Daji, one of the most evil women in ancient Chinese history, and a malevolent fox spirit. I think the takeaway of this story isn't just to not do the cruel things that they did, but to also to treat many aspects of Daji and King Zhou as fictional, and that without archaeological evidence, it is so easy to believe the words of historians that may have glorified or tainted a person from what they really were in real life. So yeah, that brings an end to today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Once again, before I go, I encourage everyone to subscribe to my podcast, follow my Instagram, and contact me with any feedback, topic suggestions, and if you just want to have a chat. Details will be in the description box below. Alright, time to go now. Time to possess a human being. time to go eat lunch. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you all next time on the Bamboo History Podcast. Bye for now.